A lot of people think that, okay, well, I'm going to move on and life will be better. It never gets better when the relationship ends. There's so many other problems that happen, and so it's worth the investment to work on your communication.
Welcome to the Restore Go podcast, where we discover ways to restore our relationship with God and others. Now, here are your co-hosts, biblical therapist Pete Thompson and biblical coach Lynn Thompson. Together, let's learn how to restore go.
Welcome to Restore Go. I'm Pete Thompson, biblical therapist.
And I'm Lynn Thompson, biblical coach.
Today, I'd like to talk about emotional scar tissue.
And I know this topic plays a part in whether a relationship fails or succeeds. So what exactly is emotional scar tissue?
Well, in our relationships, we often get frustrated at times, things not going as planned or things happening. And so there's a level of frustration that comes out in words we say and behaviors we do. And usually the victim of that is the spouse. And so as things aren't going as planned, we might be sharp with our words or snarky, or we might be frustrated with an object in the garage.
I'm never snarky.
And sometimes that object in the garage goes flying from one place to the next as we're frustrated. And as we say and do things, what it does is it's metaphorically poking the other person's heart. And if the heart could bleed and a scar could develop, that's emotional scar tissue. And so the thing about emotional scar tissue is if it happens once a month or twice a month, the body and emotionally we could kind of adjust to that and fix that. But the problem is for most normal couples is it happens several times a week. And with all those pokes and all the scars that develop over time, now you have the issue of hardness of heart starting to happen.
So what does that do with communication? What does EST, emotional scar tissue, do with communication?
So it starts to make communication unsafe. And as communication becomes unsafe, then you don't have a way to resolve issues, because even hearing a person's voice, when you have a lot of scar tissue from them, you get triggered by the past traumas of words they've said and behaviors they've done. So now you're very hesitant and it's very risky to bring up a topic. So people ultimately will have a lot of unresolved issues.
Yeah, I can see that happens, because if you're sharing with someone and the response is volatile, you decide, well, maybe it's better not to bring it up at all, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just going to shut down.
And, normally in a relationship, a marriage, usually the first 3 years are very critical years, because that is the time you're talking about the norms of what you grew up in childhood and your spouse's norms. And you've got to be able to talk about, what are we going to do? What's going to be our norms? What are the things that we're going to agree on, how we celebrate Christmas, what we do for Easter? Do we celebrate Halloween? Why or why not? And so you have to have the ability to talk about those things to set what we're going to do. But if communication isn't safe, then everybody, the one go back to being two.
Right. Yeah.
And that becomes problems, because it's not safe to bring up things, and the enemy, it's like splitting a log. If you can get them to become from 1 to 2 on one issue, then you can keep hammering that wedge into the relationship. So instead of 1, now we're 2 people with different opinions and we don't understand each other.
Right. You almost get like one person being passive aggressive, just like, well, sure, honey, I'll do it. And then you're like going off on your own thing.
Yeah.
Or becoming so angry and volatile that you're demanding your own way. And that's not a healthy place to be either.
Yeah.
Doesn't everyone, though, experience EST? I mean, I know in our book, Tools for Communication, we even talk about Bible men and women who experienced EST. Is it common for everybody?
Yeah. And it happens anytime you have 2 human beings together. You're going to probably have some EST.
Right.
And, the frequency and the intensity of it are factors that are going to influence what type of damage and how quickly the damage grows, so that you get hardness of heart in both partners. And and what I hear in my office, and I've heard it for decades, is I love so-and-so, but I just can't trust that they're not going to hurt me anymore. And so they want to end the relationship because they're just tired of being hurt. They don't see any hope or any path forward. And that's why I wrote this book, Effective Tools for Communication.
Right. So does this stem from childhood? Does this go way back, like some of the EST?
Yeah, because our parents are humans, and they have flaws and we have flaws, and so sometimes we think we're doing something that's expedient, but there's damage in the way we say something or the way we do something. And so we have a lot of scars growing up. Even in healthy families, there's things that were done and said that stick with people that they have a tough time forgetting.
Right.
And it impacts how they go to future relationships and how they do in those future relationships.
Well, I mean, there are no perfect parents, right?
Right.
There are no perfect children.
Right.
So sometimes I feel like a parent, maybe the children are putting EST on us. It's like, wait, who's giving the EST here? And I do. I think it goes both ways. Like you said, it's human interaction. And, us, people trying to maneuver through and get their way, right? Or to say something that needs to be said, but not saying it in a good way. And so there's a lot of that scar tissue building up. So what's the answer? I mean, do we just keep paying it forward from generation to generation? Like, oh, this is what my dad did to me or my mom did to me, and I'm just going to, bring it on to this generation, the next generation. I mean, what is the thing that stops it from?
I mean, the only thing that really stops it is the relationship that we have with God and the ability of His example to model what forgiveness is. And we know the steep cost that His forgiveness cost Jesus dying on a cross. And so I always look at the idea that I've done worse things to God than anybody's ever done to me. So when it's like, oh, Pete, you need to forgive because I've forgiven you of so much more. And that's the only way that we get through the scar tissue is we have to forgive. And, Peter asked the same famous question, Lord, how often do I forgive? And he said 70 times 70. And so it's a nonstop process because without forgiveness, bitterness sets in, and that really does damage to the relationship.
Hey friends, let's be honest. It can be difficult, if not impossible, to find a Christian therapist that's true to your values. Pete Thompson knows that. As a licensed therapist, he is committed to providing godly counsel, introducing helpful tools battling everyday problems like anxiety, addictions, as well as marriage and parenting challenges. Give Pete a call to set up your next confidential appointment online or in the office. Visit pthompson.org. Again, that's pthompson.org.
And I think, that is so hard because, we can always say, oh, forgive. I mean, we don't forget, right? Forgetting is something actually that helps us know not to do something again or to not be put in a similar situation again. But at the same time, again, how many times do I forgive, right? And it's infinite because of the grace of God, because He's forgiven us. But, there are couples that think, well, I'm not going to be able to forgive this person, so I'm going to move on to the next person, and maybe that will go better. Are you finding that that it works better that way, where you just like, well, I can't forgive this person, so I'm going to go on to my next relationship?
So that has a multiplying effect, because the issues that God wants to help us solve in our first relationship, if they're not solved in the first relationship, then we take those issues to the second relationship. And the other person that's been married before, they're taking their issues into this new relationship. So now we've got, things that weren't fixed in our first marriage, and now we got twice as many issues. And a lot of times we have kids in the new relationship as well. And so we have their issues that were left from parents separating and divorcing. And so those issues come in. And so it's a magnifying effect. God's will is for us to restore our issues in our first marriage. That's God's best for us. Sometimes we don't have control because the other person walked away, and we can't rope them up and keep them in the house
lock them in a closet.
Lock them in a closet, saying, well, you're staying in this marriage and not get taken to prison for kidnapping or something like that. But that's God's will, right. And so when two people are willing to work on their communication issues and other things that are giving each other scar tissue, God can do amazing things. And I've seen Him do that over the last 4 decades.
Right. It's funny when you talk to a young couple, you'll talk about this, and many times I've heard one of them say, well, that sounds like a lot of work. I mean, really, this idea of being able to have good communication where you're not bringing emotional scar tissue onto another person, it actually takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work.
Yes, it takes a lot of work, but the same variable. So we take our cars in to get the oil changed every 5,000 to 6,000 miles, which is really good maintenance. And so because by not doing that, we avoid a whole lot of problems, because a relationship ending keeps the pain and the trauma from that without not fixing it, goes on for decades and can pass to the next generation and the next generation. That's why God was so adamant, I hate divorce because I hate what it does to people. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of the book that I wrote, Tools for Better Communication, was designed to help people at least communicate in a better way so they don't give scar tissue, because there's still a lot of scar tissue, emotional scar tissue that has to be dealt with. But if we can just stop giving the frequency of new emotional scar tissue, the relationship with God's help can get healthier over time.
Right. And, in the scriptures, we're given a good motivator actually for forgiving other people. I'm thinking of Matthew 6:14-15, where it says, if you forgive others their transgressions, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others of their transgressions, then your heavenly Father is not going to forgive you your transgressions. And it sounds very conditional. I mean, God must have put a high priority on forgiveness in order to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the love of God that lives in us is pushing us for forgiveness. And when refuse to forgive, well, they did this terrible thing 3 too many times to me, we're actually shutting God down in our life.
Right, right. I'm always thinking about the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. I did a study on Matthew one time, and it's interesting because we even pray it in many times. The traditional prayers are forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors.
Yes.
And really the concept of debt refers to a broken contract, right?
Yeah.
We had a contract with God to love him and be obedient to him, and we've broken that. And because we owe a debt that we cannot pay, we need to forgive others who also owe a debt they can't pay. I mean, that is the reality, is when people have put emotional scar tissue upon us by their behavior or the things they've said, they now have a debt they can't pay. They can't take it back. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I mean, It's there. And yes, you can try to do damage control. Yes, you can. But ultimately, it has to be the forgiveness.
Yep.
Because there's no way to go back. And we can't go back. We have sinned. We have fallen short of the glory of God.
Yep.
Or we've fallen short of everything. And we need that forgiveness. We need that grace. How could we not bestow it upon others, right? Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of that story of the man who asked for the king to forgive him his debt. Mm-hmm. And then he went back and strangled his servant because he owed a lesser debt. Yeah.
Like 1/10 or 1/100th of a debt. And so he would, the person owed the greatest debt, he was like, all right, I got out of this debt. Now I'm going to go get some spending cash.
Right.
And it's like it went over his head, and he didn't understand what God expected of him.
Right. Right. So what's the goal? Yes, forgive. But what do we do with our emotional scar tissue received or inflicted upon others going forward? What is our next to do? Since we realize this is, we do the forgiveness, we know that we have to forgive. Now, what do we do going forward?
Well, in the tools for better communication, there's a series of several tools that I teach people of how to not give scar tissue in 5 specific situations that can be easily given. And with understanding those tools and changing how we communicate to our spouses, it will do wonders in the relationship, and God will use that. And I've seen God use these tools. I've been teaching these tools for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I've seen the relationships change as we look at each individual tool. And when you think about it, and some of the examples were quite humorous, because we have to have a little bit of humor, because it is can be a very difficult topic. But the idea that it's doable, and God can restore relationships, and it's a start.
Well, I always think of, kind of a credit payment kind of concept. You've taken so many withdrawals from the bank that, you have a deficit, right?
Yeah.
But to put in good communication into a relationship is actually restorative.
Yes.
And have you seen that? Have you seen couples practicing good communication and what that does for them?
Yeah, when I'll explain one of the tools, and I'll say, hey, I want you to practice this between now and our next session. And they practice that tool, and they come with a smile on their face, because now they have hope. And as they practice more tools, and I give them other homework assignments to help them with their communication, you see them smiling again. Where when they come in, it's like, well, next stop is the divorce lawyer. And I said, well, just let's hold off on that. Give me some time to teach you something that God would use to bless you. And so that's where my heart is I see these couples, going through this really difficult stuff, as I watch my parents go through difficult stuff. And there's a part of me that just really wants to be used by God to be able to bless couples and give them hope and show them a different way, so that so that their marriage can be blessed and their children can grow up happy with two parents living in the same house, not fighting over custody arrangements and, all the terrible things that happen when a relationship ends. And, a lot of people think that, okay, well, I'm going to move on and life will be better. It never gets better when the relationship ends. There's so many other problems that happen. And so it's worth the investment to work on your communication. And I hope that as you find my book out there, that you spend the time to read it and take to heart what God has given me to say to people who are struggling with communication, because God really wants to bless every family.
So let's jump into some questions. If you have a question you'd like for us to address on air, email your questions to kidfishy@restorego.net. Again, that's kidfishy, KIDFISHY, @restorego.net. So here's our first question, Pete. I think my spouse is a narcissist. Isn't that a reason to leave?
Well, I think when you look at our human condition, our sinful condition, I could probably make a point that a lot of us have narcissistic traits.
Yeah, for sure.
And to be a true narcissist, it really has to be diagnosed by a professional, because there's a certain number of categories and time frequency that have to be met to be officially have a narcissistic personality disorder, which is a mental illness.
Right. But most people don't really check all those boxes, do they?
No, they don't. Because we all will check some boxes when we're thinking of ourselves first, and other things that when our priorities are misplaced.
Right. Because it is our natural tendency to kind of think of ourselves first. And for the person that's on the receiving end of that selfishness, it's easy for them to kind of go, I think you're a narcissist. I mean, you can see why they're thinking that way, but that's really good to hear that there are people that do
qualify for that diagnosis.
Right. But it's not as common as people would think.
No.
So get your person to the doctor to see if that's really a thing or not. Or if it's just maybe something they need to work on in who they are as a person, right? They need some development in learning.
And sometimes going to seeing a therapist over some issues that are causing conflict in the relationship can be very helpful, because a therapist then can see what's going on and can coach and treat both individuals of what they're actually seeing, and maybe take the anxiety down a ledge because they're acting normally for that situation, so we don't make the situation worse than it is. And so at least get a professional involved so that they can help you navigate this period or this situation in your relationship.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so our next question from one of our supporters, and it's so funny. I remember when this question was asked, and I actually laughed out loud, not because it's a bad question, but you will see why in a minute. They said, is your marriage, meaning yours and my marriage, easier since you're a therapist and I'm a biblical coach? I had to laugh, because I don't think is there such a thing as an easy marriage? I don't think so.
Well, as long as you got two human beings. Now, if one of the human beings, Elon Musk, figures out how to make a robot, then the robot just does what they're programmed to do. So that could be easy, because then you could have
one person in the
relationship doing everything they want, and the robot's like, okay, yeah, I agree, good plan,
I don't think they call that a relationship.
No, they don't call that a relationship. But I had to, when they're going with robots and all that, I kind of had to throw some humor in there. But anytime you have two human beings that are basically have the sin nature,
Right.
you're going to have all kinds of complications, and it's not going to be easy. The thing that makes it workable is, number one, that both people, and this might be a struggling point for somebody, but you have to love God more than the other person.
Right.
And they have to love God more than you, because as a result, when you're at a logjam type situation, God can say, hey, Pete, you're holding this a little too tightly. You need to relax on this a little bit. But God, I think I'm right on this. And I think this is, it should be this way. And God's like, no, Pete, you don't have to do that. And you need to chill a little bit. And as both of you are listening to God's direction for your relationship, it's not that it makes it easy, but it makes it doable. It gives you success, and so your relationship is stable because, number one, God's helping you. Number two, you're having conversations about what's going on. You're not just reacting to what somebody is saying and then not saying anything. One of my favorite questions that I tell people is, when it looks like they're getting into a could be heated situation, when somebody makes a statement and you say, I don't know that you meant to communicate that statement that way, but I take it in probably in a more negative way than you wanted to communicate it. Can you clarify what you were asking me or what you wanted out of the statement that you just made? And it gives the other person a chance to maybe restate something and the person to rehear it before both of you begin to escalate.
So back to the question. The question was, is it easier for us, since we're both professionals and that we do, I do coach some people and you coach, or you counsel you've counseled many people over the years. But I think, we're, like you said, we're human. And I would say for us, I think it's gotten better over the years. Like, we started out, newlyweds just like everybody else. I always joke that the first 5 years you're trying to make the other person into yourself. And then you start to realize, wait, there's a benefit to them not being like me. So you and I are very different people.
Yes.
But that's been a good thing for our marriage.
Once you get past the idea that you're trying to make your partner, your spouse, just like you, then you get wisdom and insight to understand that maybe this is a good thing that she is different than me, because she's picking out different things that she sees that are critical that I don't normally look for.
Right.
And I'm able to look for specific critical things that she's not able to see. And we have conversations about those ideas, and then we come to an agreement based on both having input on that. And so that can be a real strength.
Right. So I think the answer would be, marriages work no matter who you are. But I think it is easier when you surrender to God, when you ask Him for His wisdom and strength, when you practice the tools. I mean, we practice the tools that we teach. You have to live out what you're saying. And we don't always do that, but I would say that it keeps us accountable. That's what I think. I think that the tools that we've learned over the years and that we share keep us accountable, so that we know, that wasn't okay. I know I broke that. I know I didn't use that tool in that situation. And so I think in that respect, the knowledge is good, but the knowledge is only as good as what you're willing to apply. And that's submission to the Holy Spirit.
And as we apply something, we remember it longer.
Right.
Because when it talks in James chapter 1, verses 22 through 25, be an effectual doer of what you hear rather than a forgetful hearer.
Right, right. So there you go. There's our answer to the 2 questions. Like I said, we look forward to getting mail from our listeners, from our subscribers and supporters. So if you do have any questions, we'd love to address them on the air for you. We're not going to get into detailed personal questions, but of course, general questions about what about this? What about this? We'll never mention anybody's names. In fact, we were joking that every guy is going to be named John and every girl is going to be named Sarah. So you're going to see mail from John or Sarah, or we just won't mention any names at all, but it's never going to be the name of the person that sends it in. So confidentiality is a real big thing for us. So,
yes. We want you to feel safe.
We want you to feel safe and ask whatever questions you want. And hopefully we'll be able to address your questions on the air. You can email your questions to kidfishy@restorego.net. Again, that's kidfishy, K-I-D as in dog, F as in Frank, I-S-H-Y, @restorego.net. kidfishy@restorego.net. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Restore Go podcast. Now, Restore Go is produced by Pete Thompson Christian Counseling. Pete is a licensed therapist who offers affordable family and individual counseling in North Texas and online throughout the United States. Pete provides counseling from a biblical perspective. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and visit us at PeteThompson.org.